I see how many judges, distinguished lawyers there are here, academics. It is truly impressive that all of you have come together today for this purpose. There are too many judges and notables for me to recognize you individually, but collectively, let me thank you all for being here. Representatives from different law schools and universities, organizations, both public and private, that have an abiding interest in the operation of our criminal justice system, law students, attorneys. We're delighted that you're here. Actual innocence is an extraordinarily vital topic. I've just come from teaching my evidence class, and sometimes I think that we design the rules of evidence to maximize the business for people who are in the actual innocence business. It's not always clear that we're creating the best rules that we can, but we do have some mistakes made. I've often told my class, in fact, that at some level, it's not the real accuracy of the system that's important for its preservation and social acceptance. It's the public's perception that the system is accurate that really keeps it going. And now we have a situation when we're dealing with actual innocence where the two combine, where in fact the perception that the system is convicting the right people and the reality of whether they are convicting the right people has come together, because now we have situations where we have pretty good proof that mistakes are being made, and it really is, I think, vital for the continued viability of the system to be able to correct those mistakes, because otherwise the public's perception will be undermined and people will not consider it a system that is worthy of being continued. And so the work that's being done in the area of actual innocence, I think, is of vital importance, not just to the individuals who are affected, but to maintaining the public trust that the criminal justice system is an appropriate way of dealing with crime in this country. And so I'm delighted that you're here. I'm proud that you are here at the University of Texas to do this. And before I turn it over to Judge Hervey, there's just one other thing I would like to do, and that is take a little moment of personal privilege and say something about my longtime colleague and good friend, Bob Dawson. I've been at the law school for 27 years. It has been my great privilege to be his friend and colleague for all that time. And I'll say that Bob's been doing law school teaching for a long, long time. He started our criminal defense clinic before I got here 27 years, probably about 30 years ago now. And to be quite candid, there is a tendency after you've been at this business for a long, long time to sort of get tired and run out of new ideas and sort of go through the motions. And what is extraordinary about Bob is, after all this time, he is still coming up with new ideas, still plugging at it, and I think the fact that he was so vitally involved in the creation of the actual innocence program at this law school is really a testament to what an extraordinary scholar and person with an interest in the functioning of the criminal justice system that he is. And so I just want to say thank you to Bob for all these years of friendship and for the wonderful things you've done for the law school. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker of the morning, and that is Judge Barbara Hervey. Judge Hervey is a graduate of St. Mary's School of Law. Before that, a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She's been a judge on the Court of Criminal Appeals for 4 years now, since November of 2000 or 2001?
Well, I started in 2001.
2001, I'm sorry, 2001. For that, Assistant Criminal District Attorney in Bexar County for 16 years. A little bit of private practice before that. She is very well known throughout the state as an author and a speaker at various seminars and CLE programs. Faculty member at the National College for District Attorneys, is now an adjunct professor teaching criminal procedure at St. Mary's, her alma mater. She has received many awards and honors during her very distinguished career. She's now a member of the American Law Institute, that very distinguished body. Received the Rosewood Gavel Award for Outstanding Judicial Service at St. Mary's Law School in 2003. The list goes on, but I'm afraid I'll be taking from her time if I were to record all her achievements. You know her well, and so please greet Judge Barbara Hervey.
Thank you, Dean. Good morning. On behalf of the Court of Criminal Appeals, I also want to welcome everyone here today, and we all hope that this will be the first of many opportunities to discuss the subject of innocence. Before I talk about the court's role in this project, I'd like to take a personal moment, to do two things. First of all, I wanted to publicly congratulate my 3 colleagues who were just reelected to the court. So Judge Myers was here a minute ago, but he ran away, as he usually does. But anyway, I wanted to congratulate them. And then I also wanted to thank Professor Dawson and David Shepard and Bill Allison for spending the time to get me up to speed on this project in the first place. Now, our role. As a member of the court, I have other responsibilities besides my judicial duties. And for me, that includes being a member of the Rules Committee and also a member of the Grant Committee. And for those of you who don't know, the court oversees a sizable education grant, and that grant is dedicated to educating prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges. There's also a portion of that grant, administrative funds, which allows the court to do other things like oversee the grant in the first place. We started to research matters that were relevant to the grant in general, and in that process we had the opportunity to meet with Professor Dawson for quite a long period of time last spring, and we discussed the need to work with the criminal justice system in Texas to address issues on innocence that have arisen. We discussed a plan to have a conference that would bring together judges, defense attorneys, prosecutors, law school administrators and faculty, legislators, and of course people from all parts of the criminal justice system to exchange ideas about creating a statewide network to deal with these issues. That's what we're here today to do. Our court unanimously voted to dedicate $10,000 to this project, and we did that this spring. And we took that from our administrative funds to help to see that we could educate as many people on this in this area. From there, we researched what was already in existence in Texas. In fact, I had an intern this summer who, that's all she did. She worked on researching what was already out there in Texas, and we were talking, I was driving Professor Dawson crazy, I'm sure, talking to him quite often about what was there and what we could do to expand it. We have a plan to see that a statewide clearinghouse of information on innocence cases exists, and to help each law school, and perhaps some undergraduate schools as well, I know there are some undergraduate people here, to maintain clinics such as those at UT and the University of Houston. We'd like to see that happen, but we need funding. We have some ideas at the court, and I have met with Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, and I'll have a meeting with his general counsel next Tuesday in an effort to try to see where we can go to get some funding. I have also talked to Senator Whitmire several times. I've talked to several state reps, and we will continue to meet with them so that we can try to find some funding for this project. Okay. The integrity of the system and the personal integrity of each and every one of us demands that we work to see that no innocent person be convicted or imprisoned. And the Court of Criminal Appeals is dedicated to help everybody in this system to see that that's done. So that's our plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. I'm David Shepard. I'm one of the 3 people here at the law school, along with Bill Allison and Bob Dawson, who have started and run the Texas Actual Innocence Project here at the law school at UT. What I'm going to do right now is just go through and introduce everybody to each other, tell you who's here, and when I call your name, please just raise your hand and let me know you're here. And when I get to the end, if somebody's walked in and I didn't call your name, please let me know that too. I'm going to read from the list that is available to all of you of the people that were invited, and we've had, fortunately, a few others show up, and everybody's welcome here. If I call your name, please let me know who you are. Jim Bethke with the Task Force on Indigent Defense. Professor Robert Bing at the University of Texas at Arlington. Jeff Blackburn, attorney from Amarillo, Texas. Jeff, are you staying in Amarillo or moving somewhere, right? Okay, it's hard to tell the difference, I know. Betty, that's right. Betty Blackwell, attorney here in Austin, Texas. Leanne Breeding of the Denton DA's office. Jack Choate, district attorney of Walker County. Assistant district attorney. Judge Kathy Cochran of the Court of Criminal Appeals. Lawrence Coleman of Senator Whitmire's staff, back there in the back. Professor Alicia Daniel of Texas Southern, is that correct? Good to have you here. John Davis, district attorney in El Paso, their office. Hadn't gotten in yet. Elizabeth Dennis of the South Texas College of Law, back there in the back. Shannon Edmonds, is he here from the District and County Attorneys Association? I haven't seen him yet this morning. Jeff Edwards, who's an attorney here in Austin. Raman Gill of the Texas Appleseed Project. Raman here? Oh, I saw her earlier. Judge Larry Gist, and is it Beaumont? Am I got that right? District Judge there. Marcy Greer of Fulbright and Jaworski. Invited, not here yet. Renee Guerra, District Attorney Hidalgo County. He's here. Steve Hall of the ACLU. Steve. Keith Hampton, attorney here and also lobbyist with the Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. Judge Sid, and am I pronouncing this correct, Harrell or Harley? Harrell. Judge Sid Harrell, District Judge in Bexar County. District Judge Bill Harmon in Houston. Has he made it in yet? Okay. Judge Hervey, whom you have already seen. Rusty Hubbard, attorney here in Austin. Way back there in the back. Judge Cheryl Johnson just walked in. Hello, Judge. Welcome. Judge Sharon Keller, presiding judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals. She's out in the hallway, probably trying to find Judge Myers. Oh, he's out in the hallway with her. She's teaching him a lesson. Rob Keppel, executive director of the District and County Attorneys Association, is here. Andrea Kylan, who's also with him, is that correct? No. Texas Insurance, I'm sorry. Richard Langlois, attorney in San Antonio. Richard. Annette Lavoie, executive director of Texas Appleseed, over there. Annette. Professor James Love, Lamar University, over here. Barry Macha, district attorney of Wichita Falls. Honorable Sharon McCrae, Bexar County district judge. She made it. There she is. Professor James Marquardt of Sam Houston State. Not here yet. Betty Marshall of the State Prosecuting Attorney's Office. I haven't seen Betty yet. Laura McElroy, General Counsel of the Board of Pardons and Paroles, back in the very back. Hi, Laura. Judge Larry Myers, who's out in the hallway. Janice Monger, Departmental Director of Texas Appleseed. Is she here yet? Okay. Jerry Morris just walked in, criminal defense lawyer here in Austin. Professor Victoria Palacios of SMU. Professor. Matthew Paul, State's Attorney. Still not here. Tom Pappas from Dallas. Tom, are you back there? Dean Bill Pyatt, St. Mary's University. Dean, good to have you here. Honorable Tom Price, Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. I have not seen him this morning. Walter Reeves, attorney from West Texas. Walter? Waco. Got that wrong. Roark Reed from SMU Law School. Mr. Reed. Carl Reynolds, General Counsel of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Judge Rose Raina from Edinburgh. Is she here? Jack Rohde, Harris County District Attorney's Office. Jack's here. Assistant Dean Carol Robinson of Texas State University. Is she here? Do you know? I don't see her. John Rollator. Am I pronouncing that Rollator? Rollator. District Attorney's Office of Dallas. Josh Schaefer, attorney in Houston. And with him, his daddy, Randy, attorney in Houston also. Kind of a tag team. Wesley Shackelford, Task Force on Indigent Defense. Ed Shaughnessy, District Attorney's Office in Bexar County. Haven't seen him yet this morning. Professor John Stickles, University of Texas at Arlington. Over here. Jack Strickland, Defense Attorney from Fort Worth, Texas. Jack. Robert Udison, Defense Attorney from Dallas. Kim Vernon, State Counsel for Offenders, who's going to the Supreme Court at the end of this month, right? Good. Judge Kristen Wade of Dallas. Christy Ward, a Texas Tech law student. She make it in? Good for you. Leslie Watts of the Court of Criminal Appeals. Leslie. Honorable John Whitmire, I don't think he's here. He's over doing another law school project, as I understand it, at the Senate, but hopefully we'll have him here. Sarah Wolf, Texas District and County Attorneys Association. Judge Paul Womack, Court of Criminal Appeals. Drew Wright, I don't think he's here, a local lawyer from Etoff and Jacks. And Bill Allison, UT Law School. David Dowd, University of Houston Law School. And Professor Bob Dawson there. All right, anybody who's here whose name I did not call. Thank you all for all being here. Our first speakers on this program, and let me just give you a sense of how the day is going to go here. We're going to have some fairly structured presentations this morning. We want you to understand that this is a give and take kind of forum. We don't want this to just be pure talking heads and you kind of take notes and nod off occasionally. We're talking about issues that are fast-moving, unresolved, and there's lots of unworked out problems here. We would like everybody in the audience to contribute their perspective and their issues and their comments to each speaker as they go along as they see fit. We would like this to be an open debate and a colloquium for everybody. We're going to start off with a history of the Innocence projects, a short explanation of what they are and where they came from and why they exist. And then Bob Dawson is going to go through what is really the meat of the morning program, and that is what is the state of innocence law in the state of Texas, and what are the problems that are in that law and what await to be addressed. I'll do a short thing about the first step when we think someone is innocent. Then we're going to have lunch. The lunch is catered here in this building in the atrium where we signed up, first came in. It's a wonderful lunch, so nobody has to leave, and it's a chance for everybody to talk and get to know each other a little bit better. After lunch, we're going to follow up on kind of how cases are screened in innocence projects and then presented. And then we're going to have the district attorneys present their views of some of the problems they see on how they have to deal with these same issues that the rest of us deal. After that, we're going to take a short break. Now, we have intentionally put the very academic part that really may be of interest only to the law school people at the very end of the program after the afternoon break. So the afternoon break at about 3 o'clock was originally just going to be cookies and soft drinks. That has now been officially changed to hors d'oeuvres and wine and beer and all the stuff we're really after. Most of y'all may not want to come back in after that break to hear the very intellectual stuff. We want you to stay here. Let's get to know each other. Let's talk through some of the things we've learned and some of the issues that have been brought up. Those that are interested are welcome to come in here. But my guess is it's going to be mainly law school people talking about how we run innocence projects and get them started in our administrative issues. And everybody else is welcome to stay the whole rest of the afternoon and get to know each other and talk. Our first, the restrooms, by the way, are right outside. If you go out this door in that main hallway, they're kind of hidden off on the side there. Our first speakers are David Dow of the University of Texas, University of Houston School of Law, and Bill Allison of the University of Texas School of Law. David Dow is a Rice graduate and then Yale Law School graduate. He, some years back, how many years has it been since you started your project, David? Almost 5 years, started the first real innocence project in the state of Texas, and he kind of did it out of his own pocket with literally bake sales, I believe, just on his own. Put it together and has had tremendous success with it, kind of inventing it from scratch. Based on that and because of some experiences, Bill Allison, who represented two people here in Travis County on innocence claims, both of whom were exonerated as provably innocent of the crimes they were in prison for, and had them released, and was named as a result of that, I believe, by the State Bar as Defense Lawyer of the Year a couple of years ago. He got me and Bob Dawson involved in this. We were interested in it, and has also helped start this project here. Bill is a graduate of Swanee University undergraduate and University of Texas Law School, has taught at the University of Texas Law School as an adjunct professor for over 25 years, is now a full clinical professor of law here at the University of Texas School of Law. And I give you both David Dow and Bill Allison.
I've been told that Judge Myers is hosting all the breaks out in the hall, so he's going to have historical status by the end of the day. The history of organized innocence projects is very short. we use the date 1989 as the first date because that's the first time DNA was used in an exoneration, and it was used in the Marion Coaxley case in New York City. It was a case that was where Bronx public defender, the Legal Services Organization in New York, was representing him, and Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld from Cardozo Law School became involved in that. And using the old rudimentary RFLP, the DQ alpha stage of DNA, which was not nearly as specific as what we have today, and uniquely borrowing students from their own criminal defense clinic at Cardozo Law School, they cracked that case and got the Bronx DA's office to agree to release Mr. Coaxley because he was provably actually innocent through the use of early DNA. And of course, everybody now knows who Scheck is from the same use of DNA and the same approaches in the Simpson case. He and Neufeld both were in that. So 1989 is the date we pick as the beginning of organized approaches to actual innocence. But I think it's not fair if we don't recognize that in Texas in the 1980s, from starting I guess 1980 through 1991, that we have really 4 famous actual innocence cases: Randall Dale Adams, Linnell Jeter, Clarence Brantley, and Joyce Ann Brown. Randy, I believe you represented Randall Dale Adams, not only Randall Dale Adams, but later A.B. Butler, Anthony Robinson, and I think that probably from as far as private counsel goes, Randy has done more innocence work than anybody in the state. We don't know at this point, we haven't studied, and one of the things that the Texas Center for Actual Innocence wants to do is to go back and look at those 4 seminal cases. Those are pre-DNA cases. They had nothing to do with DNA. And they're fascinating, and we don't know much about them. So at some point, the center is going to, in the next year or two, institute a study, and hopefully Randy will talk with us about Adams and Butler and Robinson and all those cases, and we'll be able to put together an interesting history, not so much from a procedural history and a legal history. That's really what we're interested in here, not the stories, not the great human interest stories that are in the Actual Innocence book that Scheck and Dwyer and Neufeld published. But there's also two other things that happened in the 80s that are very important to actual innocence. And the first is the foundation in 1983 in Princeton, New Jersey, of the Centurion Ministries by Reverend James McCloskey. McCloskey became interested in a prison ministry, and out of that formed this. Centurion Ministries is not a ministry. It is basically an investigating service. And what they do is try to find actually innocent people, do the investigation, and then find a lawyer to help them. Let me give you an example. Joyce Ann Brown, a woman who was convicted in 1980 for, I believe, for murder on a misidentification, spent 10 years in a Texas prison. Justice Kerry Fitzgerald, who, by the way, sends his apologies, he's had a death in the family, he wanted to be here, represented her in 1989 at her exoneration. Centurion Ministries did the investigation and found the actual person who had done that murder in a prison in New Mexico. So Centurion Ministries, this organization that started in 1983, investigated the Joyce Ann Brown case. Kerry Fitzgerald got her out. Joyce Ann Brown then goes to Dallas and starts an organization called MASS, M-A-S-S. And MASS's first idea was to help the actually innocent. So prior to David, prior to us, in Texas, there was this organization, and still is this organization, called MASS. Now, the reason that MASS has really kind of morphed from seeking out the actually innocent. They still want to do that, but they have found a greater calling in helping people transition from prison into real life. And that's what she has done so well, and she's dedicated her life to that. So we really have in Texas some histories with Centurion being involved in major cases and then the establishment of mass of going back a long ways in the actual innocence business, long before DNA came along. I've tried to determine exactly when the first DNA exoneration in Texas is, and the only one that I can find is Ben Salazar in 1996. Randy, do you know of an earlier one that used DNA? There probably is, but I just don't. Okay. Okay. All right. The first use of DNA in prosecution in Texas was in 89 or 90. The first use of DNA in prosecution in the United States was 1989, and the first use of it anywhere in the world for prosecution was in the United Kingdom in 1986. So we are talking about stuff that is very new. And by the way, let me just comment that when we're talking about this actual innocence stuff today, we are talking about really groundbreaking, difficult stuff. I gave a talk 2.5 years ago to the Austin Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and I came down pretty hard on the Court of Criminal Appeals. Then we formed the center, started teaching, and I gave that same talk 2 months ago, and my attitude now is I have great sympathy for the court. I feel sorry for you guys. This is a hard area of law. Courts have never had the ability to find anybody actually innocent. It is so taxing and so strange that all of the old models that we keep trying to fit it into are not, maybe they just don't work very well, and Bob is going to speak to that. We aren't going to have the answers today, but what we do have is this wonderful opportunity to start the dialogue. One of the things that I would like to know in the history of these projects, by the way, out of the Coaxley case, the use of students from the Criminal Defense Clinic at Cardosa with Barry and Peter to solve that case, they founded the first actual innocence project within a law school context at Cardosa, and that is the Innocence Project in New York. And it became a clinical program, and it is limited. The Innocence Project in New York is limited solely to DNA cases. They don't do anything else. They won't take recantation cases or other types of cases. It's all DNA based. By 1990, and then the next thing that in the history is Herrera versus Collins, and I would love to know how much the justices on the United States Supreme Court at the time they issued Herrera in 1993 knew about Coaxley, knew about the use of DNA. They never mention it. They never mention Coaxley. Its DNA is never mentioned. You can, Herrera versus Collins to me is like statistics. You can use it for almost anything you want to use it for. It sounds like that the courts absolutely will not entertain actual innocence, and then there's the big however. And the however, into the however comes DNA. And DNA is that silver bullet that's never mentioned but is there. By 1995, the Innocence Project in New York was swamped, and Barry and Peter were talking to various people around the nation. I was one of them because I was involved in clinical law, about starting other projects. Where they got started was in Boston, which was a collaboration between private lawyers and a number of law schools in Boston. Slightly later at the University of Wisconsin, and then a very interesting project in Seattle, which was another one of these collaborative projects, that is, private lawyers collaborating with a law school, but the Innocence Project at that time was not part of the law school. It is now. The Northwestern Project is now inside the University of Washington Law School. The interesting thing about the Northwestern Innocence Project was they formed around a locus of cases that were just sitting there ready for them to do. And those were satanic ritual child abuse cases out of Wenatchee, Washington. And I believe they eventually exonerated everybody in those cases. And then they kept going. They hit a lull after that because that was their reason for existence. Today, and I think does everybody have the CD? Did you pick up your CDs? Okay. Those CDs contain the manuals the teaching manuals for our clinic and for David Dow's clinic. In that material is a listing, the latest listing of all Innocence projects across the nation, among others. In Texas, nothing was happening in terms of organizing Innocence projects until a meeting in Houston in May of 1999. And I'm going to turn this over to David and let David talk about that meeting and then the foundation of the Innocence Clinic at the University of Houston, the Texas Innocence Network, and then I'll come back and finish up and tell you how we started TCAI here.
The history of Innocence operations in Texas has actually two different prongs. One of the prongs, I think, goes back to the fall of 1999, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. That prong involves the actual establishment of an Innocence program and the investigation of cases and the attempt to implement some strategy on behalf of inmates who were deemed to be innocent. The other prong has a history that has not yet started. One of the projects that we would like to do in the Innocence community is create what we sometimes refer to as an FAA model in the Innocence world. You know, when an airplane crashes, the FAA investigates the crash and figures out why it crashed and then makes recommendations so that the causes that resulted in that tragedy don't recur in another case. Perhaps that's the first thing that should actually have happened in the Innocence world, but it's complicated to put that sort of FAA commission in place. And one of the reasons that I'm so pleased by the people who are here today, I met Judge Hervey outside before we started and had a pleasant chat with her and told her how excited I was. I saw Judge Cochran, who used to be a colleague of mine at the University of Houston before she got promoted to her current position. One of the reasons that I'm pleased to see the people who are in this room is because I think that it's people who can help us establish what we refer to as the FAA model so that we can figure out why mistakes that we're certain that we made actually occurred and then implement procedures, whether they be specific to counties or whether they be statewide, that address those mistakes. And so far, there's nothing at all like that, not only in Texas, but for that matter, anywhere in the country. And it'd be nice to see Texas get out in front of the curve with a project like that. The part of the Innocence operation that does have a little bit of a history is the actual identification of innocent inmates and the implementation of efforts on their behalf. And I just want to describe that fairly briefly before handing the podium back to Bill. There were two meetings in 1999. The first occurred in the offices of, I don't remember whether they were already the Texas Defender Service or whether they were some intermediate entity, but it was a group of people who were interested in setting up an Innocence program in Texas. And then the second meeting occurred about 6 weeks later when the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association had its annual big 3-day CLE in Houston. And at the end of that meeting, at the end of the annual TCDLA conference, there was a group of people, actually about the size of the group that's assembled here today, that met and decided that Texas needed an Innocence program. And Bill was there, and I'm sure there were people there who were in this room, but I just didn't really know the players at that point, and so I wouldn't have even known who you were back in late 1999. But there were law professors from 5 or 6 or 7 different law schools. There were academics from other departments. There were, of course, plenty of lawyers. There were prosecutors there. There were a few judges there, and there were community activists like Joyce Brown, who was there. And we decided Texas needs this program. Let's start it. So we put together a list, much like the one that Dave Shepard was reading from, where everybody put down their name and address and phone number and email address, and we decided we were going to start this thing. I went back to the law school where I'd been on the faculty. I joined the U of H faculty in 1989. I went back to the law school and sent an email to the entire student body saying, we've started this Innocence program. Let me know if you're interested in working on cases. And I expected I'd get 5 or 6 or 7 responses, and to my stupefaction, I got 50 or 60. Well, the next thing that happened will not surprise you if you're familiar with organizational behavior. Nothing happened because all of the people who'd been in that room had other things to do, and they had jobs and careers, and nobody had really given much thought how to put one of these programs together. And truth be told, I probably would have been like everybody else in the room also, except that I had made the mistake of sending an email to all of the students at the law school saying we were starting this thing. And law schools can be a relentless group, and they kept writing me saying, when are you going to have a case for me to work on? They kept dropping by my office, when are you going to have a case for me to work on? And so, as some of you know, I do post-conviction death penalty work, and at that time I had 4 or 5 active cases, and 2 of them had what I believed to be plausible innocence claims, and so I said, you know what, I'll just put the students on my own cases to get them off, my back. And so I put students on a couple of death penalty cases. And then what happened was an accident. And the accident was that the students started to tell people that we had this Innocence program that was up and running. And so the word eventually made it into the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And inmates didn't draw a distinction between a program that was working for 2 or 3 death row inmates and a general innocence program, and we all of a sudden became inundated with mail. We went from getting 10 pieces of mail a week to getting 50 to getting 100 to our current volume, which is about 200 pieces of mail a week, almost all of which is from general population inmates rather than death row inmates. So we all of a sudden had a problem on our hand that we needed to deal with, and so I just decided, well, I've got all these students who are interested in these cases. I've got this big volume of inmates who are saying, I'm innocent, will you please look into my case? We'll start this program. And so in March of 2000, we established the Texas Innocence Network. Unlike Barry and Peter's program in New York, we're not limited to DNA cases. We'll do DNA cases, we'll do non-DNA cases. In fact, our first exoneration, which I'll describe in just a moment, was a non-DNA case. For the first 5 semesters that we were operating, from March of 2000 through the summer of 2001, the students were doing it because they believed in it. I was not yet offering a course. They weren't getting any credit. I wasn't paying them anything. What we were doing was financing the actual cost of investigations from my travel budget, but the students were doing it just because they believed in it. And in those 5 semesters, the students in the aggregate accumulated close to 10,000 investigative hours. And most of those hours were actually spent investigating the case of a death row inmate by the name of Max Sofair, whose case we were working on in conjunction with Sofair's appointed lawyers who were at the Washington, D.C. office of Fried Frank. And some of you may know that Sofair has been up and down in terms of the relief that he's gotten both in the Court of Criminal Appeals and also in the Fifth Circuit. But as he currently stands, a panel of the Fifth Circuit believed that the evidence of his actual innocence was compelling enough to order that a new trial be granted. And whether that order actually holds up in front of the entire Fifth Circuit is unknown at this point. But a great deal of the evidence that was collected in connection with that case was connected by the first batch of law center students who were doing that investigation with no recompense of any kind. Now, beginning in the fall of 2001, I began to offer the course as a clinical offering. Students could get clinical credit for it. And once that happened, students began to take the course regularly. We now have about 10 to 12 a semester. 10 to 12 students start every semester, and usually half of those continue working for the next semester. So at any given moment, there are 15 to 20 students who, under my supervision, are investigating claims of actual innocence. And since we started offering the program for credit, the students have gathered around 20,000 investigative hours in the aggregate. Just so that you have a sense of numbers, we started, as I said, in March 2000. Since March 2000, we have reviewed approximately 5,000 cases. It doesn't mean we've investigated 5,000 cases, and this afternoon I'm going to talk about the actual procedures that we use to move cases through various stages. But it means that we have evaluated or processed 5,000 cases. That translates into 3 cases a day, 365 days a year. We run all year long. We've got a fall program, we've got a spring program, and we've got a summer program, and it never shuts down. So we're basically evaluating approximately 3 cases a day, and it's added up to, as I say, about 5,000 cases since we started. The results, as I stand here today, as I was telling both Bill and Bob before we started today, we've had 2 exonerations, and by exonerations I mean that we have had the Board of Pardons and Parole recommend a pardon based on innocence. In one of those cases, the governor granted a pardon based on innocence. That was a DNA case. In the other case where the board recommended a pardon based on innocence, the governor recommended, or granted rather, just a full pardon, which was a disappointment to me, although I must say not so much to the inmate. He was happy simply to have his inmate acknowledged it wasn't a sex crime, and so he didn't have to worry about registering as a sex offender, and he was just happy to get out and get married and get on with his life. We have 3 cases, I think, that are fairly close to the end of the pipeline. 2 of them are clemency petitions that are currently pending in front of the board, and I'll be, as you can imagine, jawboning Laura McElroy later today. And one of them is actually on the state habeas side, but we're relatively confident that we'll get a favorable finding of innocence in that habeas proceeding. I mentioned the Max Sofair case earlier. In addition to the Max Sofair case, we have another death penalty case that we've investigated that we feel like we've assembled enough evidence to establish the inmate's actual innocence, and we're expecting to have a hearing in federal court fairly soon. And then another couple of cases that we've really just begun investigating that I would say look promising, although of course many cases that look promising at the beginning turn out to have the bottoms fall out later on. But what that means, just so that we have a sense, of the numbers, is that of the 5,000 cases, we have had either exonerations or expected exonerations in 1/4 of 1% of the total number of cases that have come through our office. And I mention that number for 2 reasons. The first is to tell you something about the relationship that it suggests between people like Bill and me and Bob, who run innocence programs, and people who have to evaluate the legitimacy of these innocence claims, be they trial court judges, Court of Appeals judges, Court of Criminal Appeal judges, or for that matter, people in the district attorney's offices. And that detail that I want to mention is that we are not filing very many clemency petitions. We are not filing very many habeas petitions raising claims of actual innocence. These are cases that go through rigorous screening so that we start out with a batch of 5,000 and we end up seeking relief in 5 or 10 or 20. And I mention that because it's important for people like me who are running these programs to establish the perception that, and the reality, that in the innocence world, the legal system is an adversary system, but we are not adversarial. Because, in my view, the people who occupy the bench, the people who occupy the district attorney's offices, have the same interest in having innocent people not be in prison that I do. And so I think that we really need to be thinking today and in the future about how to implement some sort of procedures so that these proceedings that we end up having to use in order to get innocent people out of prison don't partake of the same sort of adversariness that is common in the American legal system and the criminal defense system in particular. The second reason I want to mention these numbers, and then I'll hand it back over to Bill, is that the students who take these courses and who do the brunt of the work come into class all wide-eyed thinking that they're going to find the needle in the haystack. They're going to go get the videotape confession from the person who actually committed the murder 4 hours before the execution is set to be carried out, just like happened in the famous Illinois case. And so I tell them that when they come, I draw a curve on the board, and it basically slants from high up here to way down here, and I tell them, when you come into this class, this is where you are on the curve, this is your, enthusiasm. Every letter you get, you're sure the person is innocent, and you're going to go prove it. And by the end of the semester, you haven't found the 1/4 of the 1%, and you're sure that nobody's innocent, in prison. And I tell the time that I want you is right in the middle. When you're seasoned enough to not believe everything that you read, but you're still skeptical enough to realize that we do make mistakes. And so I suppose right before I sit down, I would just like to tell you that that's also what I remind myself of every day when I go to school, which is that it's wrong to think that we're way up here on the left side of the curve and that everybody in prison who says that he's innocent is. But it's equally wrong to think that we're at the right side of the curve and that there aren't any meritorious claims. And so I think that one thing that I hope we're able to accomplish today is to push, everybody who's here up towards the middle of the curve. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Bill.
When I came back from the Houston meeting in 1999, I got busy doing other things, and nothing happened here at our school to try to establish an innocence clinic or an innocence project. Largely that was my responsibility, and I just got busy. I was teaching the criminal defense clinic with David and Bob, and so it just sat. But the school kept getting letters and letters and letters. Then we hit the budget crisis, and there was no chance once everything fell off the table that we were going to establish a new clinic at the University of Texas Law School. Clinics are the most expensive way to teach law. They're fabulous. Students love it, but they are expensive. And it just was the wrong time to add a clinic. In the meantime, David Shepard and I ended up with the Carlos Lavernia case, the Christopher Ochoa case, the Richard Danziger case. 3 exonerations right in a row. They were thrilling. They were very heavily covered by the press. We both came away from those cases saying, what a thrill. Practicing law for 30 years, and this is the best. I mean, I've never done anything like this, and it was just great. The letters kept coming in. I was getting them. Cynthia Orr was getting them. Keith had a whole box full. TCDLA had 3 boxfuls. Skip Reeves had done at least 1 exoneration up in Waco, maybe 2. How many, Skip? 1. Only 1. Gee. So as we saw the budget crisis start to ease a little bit, David and Bob and I, in the beginning of 2003, sat down and just talked about this experience, and maybe it's time to do this. But we'd been looking at David and seeing what David had been doing down there, and quite frankly, I tell you, I think, if he'd tell you the truth, he probably paid for that clinic for at least the first few years out of his own pocket, because I know that they were in the same budget crisis everybody else was in. And the model that David used was the nonprofit corporation approach to it. So that's what we adopted. And so the Innocence, the actual Innocence Clinic here at the University of Texas is a truly unique course in the curriculum of this law school. It is a course that literally is owned by the 3 of us as the nonprofit Texas Center for Actual Innocence. When we formed the center, the first place we went was to Graves, Doherty, Heron, and Moody to see if we could get a downtown sponsor, because we didn't have any place here to teach it. Now, unlike David, we thought as soon as we said, we're going to have an Innocence Clinic and threw it up on these television monitors that are all around the law school now, that we would have a flood of people. This is, it's sexy stuff, and they're going to come. I mean, run it like a club, run it like just a program, not a clinic. They're going to come. And that's exactly what happened. 2 weeks before the spring semester of 2003, Bob went to see Dean Powers, said, this is what we've done. This is who we are. We're the Texas Center for Actual Innocence. Graves Doherty is sponsoring us. We want to start a clinic as part of what the Texas Center does. And Dean Powers said, great, we'd love to have you. Let's do it here. Because we were set to do it downtown at Graves Doherty. And they had graciously given us an office, computer, access to phones, everything we needed. But it only made sense if Dean Powers said, look, this is the place to do it. This is where the students are. Let's do it here, downtown parking, blah, blah, blah. We said, great, this is really where we want to be anyway. And so we started. Our first clinic was in the fall of 2003, and it was we didn't really have status. We didn't have a number. We weren't really a class at that time, but the students were given extra directed study credit. The next semester, we got clinical standing, so we're now actually a course in the law school. And beginning in the spring of 2005, they're going to up the hours for it. We probably had, when we started out, I would say 4 or 5 boxes full of letters that had come. I mean, people have been holding on to these things for a long time, and they needed some place to send them. We'd sent a lot of stuff to David, but now we could take it. So we had all these letters. We passed them out to students. We quickly found out that 75% of them weren't about actual innocence at all. Where can I get a book? Well, what are you writing me about where can I get a book? You know what? There's a bookstore out there that specializes in sending books to inmates in prison. One of the things that we were able to do is, because we quickly saw that we got a lot of letters that weren't about actual innocence, is that we needed to create, as part of our project, alternative resources. We didn't want to just send letters back and say, sorry, we can't help you. I got a parole problem. The food's not good. We don't have an answer for that one yet. But we have found some interesting answers to problems that we thought wouldn't have any answers. So and I think there's on the CD-ROM is our resource list, which might be helpful to you if you get a letter from an inmate asking some bizarre question. There may really be an answer to where that you can send that inmate, and that inmate can get some help or relief. We've probably screened now 1,000 cases, David? Close to 1,000 cases. We maybe have 10 or 15 that are actively in investigations. We have not yet had an exoneration through the Texas Center, and we don't know when we will. We've had the experience of having a couple of people try to pull the wool over our eyes, and those have been very interesting. Finally, let me close by saying this, that there is a real benefit to all of us from having an organized approach to actual innocence. The clinic at Houston and the clinic here, I think really are the wave of the future. It's never going to, the private bar is always going to be involved, and they're welcome. But the one thing that we have as an advantage is that not only can we do exonerations either through writs of habeas corpus or through the clemency procedures, but we are set up to do research. We are set up to look at what these cases, back the data out of them. Along David's lines of the NTSC, the train wreck and the plane wreck, we have an obligation to try to find out, when you have an actual innocence case, exactly what went wrong, and then try to find out how we can fix it. You know, it sounds a little silly, but ultimately our goal is to go out of business. It's never going to happen, but I think if we all take it seriously and work together, we really can reduce the incidence of conviction of innocent people. And a lot of that I'll talk a little more about it this afternoon, a lot of that doesn't cost money. It doesn't take legislation. It can be implemented tomorrow if somebody wants to implement a procedure to remedy something that caused an innocent person to spend time in prison. So the organized approach the having to wrestle with a different identity, that the three of us are criminal defense lawyers, and suddenly we are in a role now that's not exactly criminal defense lawyer role. We have a burden of proof. We don't have that as criminal defense lawyers. We have an ethical obligation to make sure that when we take a person into court or to the governor's office, that we are morally certain that they are actually innocent. Very much like the type of obligations that prosecutors have in prosecuting cases. So it's a different role that we're in. We see the court struggling with this, and we're struggling with it too. And it's been fascinating. This is just the very beginning of it, and I think these dialogues are going to I have not dealt with anything in 33 years of practicing that has been as interesting as this. And these kids in this law school just eat it up. They love it. Thanks.
I don't know that I really need to introduce to you Bob Dawson. Bob has been a leading figure at the University of Texas School of Law for over 30 years as a professor. Is relied upon by the Texas legislature and the Texas government, particularly in the field of juvenile criminal law, to help them craft the appropriate legislation and deal with the legitimate issues. He has been a mentor, an instructor, and friend for prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges in the field of criminal law for those 30 years. And Bob is going to go through with you his understanding of where the law is in Texas in this complicated, fast-moving, rapidly developing area, and his idea about some issues that need to be thought about because they are not yet resolved. I'm going to be handing out an outline of his talk while he gets started. And Bob, you're up.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering where the hell was the outline, but we now know where the outline is. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I want to warn you that this conference is being videotaped, so you need to behave yourself because you're going to be preserved for posterity. I think I probably also need to apologize for the poor quality of my voice. It's due to a chronic medical condition. It's not temporary laryngitis, so it's not going to get better. You're just going to have to bear up and deal with it. People ask whether it hurts for me to speak, and it doesn't. Again, it's not like laryngitis. I am instead reminded of the comments that Mark Twain made when he was asked what he thought of the music of Richard Wagner. And Mark Twain replied, well, you know, now that I think about it, it's not really as bad as it sounds. Well, my voice is the same way. It's not really as bad as it sounds. I don't otherwise equate it with the music of Richard Wagner. I'm going to be talking to you about two things for an hour. One are some basic issues in actual innocence law and practice, and the second are the 5 elements that I think have to be in place for Texas to have a comprehensive actual innocence system, which I think ought to be our goal. Initially, I would like to thank the Court of Criminal Appeals, every single member of the court, Presiding Judge Keller, and particularly Judge Hervey for their enthusiastic support of actual innocence cases in Texas. This shows the court is really on the right side on this issue, is taking the lead, and they should be recognized and commended for doing so. It's been an enormous help to us to feel that the Court of Criminal Appeals understands innocence issues and is willing to advance the ball. A little bit later, I'll be giving a thumbnail sketch of innocence law And in my opinion, the law of actual innocence in Texas is quite well advanced. And it is beyond the jurisprudence on actual innocence in almost every other state. And I know to an outsider, particularly to a Yankee, that's going to seem incredible. My God, how could those yahoos in Texas care that much about innocent people? And that's because Yankees don't understand Texans. That's why things like that can happen. It's not my job to try to persuade Yankees. That's an impossible task, right? They're hopeless. Okay. So I want to go down some of these basic issues, and this is all new to me, like to David and Bill, and to all of us. David Dow has the most experience in this, and I want to tell you what I think the issues are. I'm probably going to get some of them wrong. I might make a fool of myself, but it wouldn't be the first time that would happen. And just sort of flesh out what I think the major issues are, and then what I think is needed in order to set up a comprehensive system for handling innocence claims, because we all know these claims are not going to go away. DNA is here. Innocence claims involve DNA. Innocence claims involve things other than DNA, but they are here, and they're growing, and I think it's a healthy development. The first question I want to talk about is, what do we mean by actual innocence? At first, it seemed to me really strange to have to say actual innocence. You know, it's like saying really pregnant or something like that. But then you think about it, and the reason is that the word innocence has been debased by overuse and inappropriate use. For example, when someone is found not guilty by a jury, we say that they were found innocent, or that they are innocent of the offense, which might be true, but more often than not is not true, because of course there's no way our legal system affords the opportunity for someone in a criminal trial to prove his innocence. It can't be done, because the best you can hope for is a verdict from the jury that says there's reasonable doubt that you were guilty. And that's miles and miles and miles away from a finding of actual innocence. It might be that the jury believed you were innocent and found you not guilty, but it may well be that the jury thought you were guilty, suspected you were guilty, and so forth, but simply were not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not to say that innocence is not the best defense in a criminal trial. It clearly is. It's just that there's no guarantee that a verdict of not guilty is going to mean that you're actually been found actually innocent. Ironically, the only way that a person can prove he's actually innocent of a crime in our society is to first be convicted of the crime. So step one, if you want to clear your name, step one is to be convicted. Okay? And that's easy enough. You can achieve that. And then step two is to avail yourself of various actual innocence procedures that we're going to talk about in order to prove that the conviction was inaccurate and that you are actually innocent. Now that's really ironic, isn't it? But it's right, and I think everyone recognizes it's right. Only a convicted person has the opportunity to prove that he or she is innocent. We're not going to change that. That I think is a fixed part of the legal landscape. We define in the Texas Center for Actual Innocence and the Actual Innocence Clinic at UT, we define actual innocence in a very narrow way. There's no legal definition of it that's sort of binding on everybody. But we define it in a way, and perhaps it's because we're a new organization, although I think we're going to continue with this. We define actual innocence as meaning only two things: either mistaken identification, that is, a crime was committed, but the inmate didn't do it. Or no crime was committed at all, as is sometimes the case. A false accusation, whether it's a knowing false accusation or not, makes no difference. We don't include in claims of actual innocence some situations in which the person may be innocent, like self-defense or defense of others or accident. So if the person was basically present, as far as we're concerned in our clinic, we don't regard that as an actual innocence case. Other people might legitimately say, well, self-defense, if it really was self-defense, the person is innocent. They committed no crime. And that's undeniably true, but our position is you're never going to be able, or at least not in very many cases, to unravel all of that. And so we put kind of a cushion around the crime. And we say, if the crime is here, the inmate's got to be out here before we say it's actual innocence. If he's around the crime, then we're sorry. We advise him to do his time. So that's our own definition of actual innocence. It was a case of mistaken identification or no crime at all was committed. And we have this margin of safety around the crime. And it's because when we go to a prosecutor or to a judge or to a board of pardons and paroles and we say, we think this guy is actually innocent, we've got to be confident as you can be, that that's actually the case. The worst thing that could happen to an organized innocence project is to present a case that turns out not to be a case of actual innocence. So we're very conservative is what I'm saying, okay? We're a bunch of conservative folks. On item 3, what kind of cases are there? Well, I think everyone knows that there are DNA cases, although it turns out on a nationwide basis, over half of the exonerations that at least some people regard as exonerations for actual innocence do not involve DNA. DNA is the driving force of the innocence movement, but it is far from the only and maybe not even the most important aspect of it. There are cases of actual innocence that have been established through forensic laboratory work, where you figure out that a lab worker in the initial prosecution made a mistake. And you have that lab work redone and by a couple of independent labs, and it becomes clear that the lab work was faulty. Not necessarily DNA lab work, it could be serology, it could be even fingerprints. And that in light of the new lab work, the person is not guilty. Forensic science is wonderful, but it's also highly fallible. I remember I practiced as an assistant public defender in the District of Columbia for a year after I started teaching, and then came back to UT and started the criminal defense clinic in 1974. This was sort of my year of training to be a trial lawyer. And we had a case in the office where a guy was charged with burglary of a post office. And they had a fingerprint at a place where there shouldn't have been a fingerprint, an entrance point, an unauthorized entrance point. And the FBI identified the fingerprint as belonging to our client. And our client kept saying, it's not my beef. It's not my beef. I didn't do it. Well, it was unfortunate because he'd been to the pen before for burglary. So, of course, his explanation that it's not my beef had very little credibility. But finally, he harassed us enough that we arranged to have an independent fingerprint examiner examine the latent print and compare it to his print, and the report came back, it's not even close to the same person. It is not even close. The FBI fingerprint examiner screwed up. We don't know why. And of course, the FBI's response to all this was not, I'm sorry, or oh my God, or take our apologies. They said, oops. That was their whole comment, oops. So of course, the U.S. attorney dismissed the case, and our guy walked away. So forensic analysis is important in exonerations because unfortunately in our society, as in many public services, we've underfunded our forensic labs woefully. And we pay a high price for that. We pay a high price in guilty people going free, and we pay a high price because occasionally an innocent person gets convicted as a result of shoddy forensic work. And I don't mean to impugn the integrity or the competence necessarily of individual lab workers. It's the system that presents the problem. Coerced confessions are another situation in which you might have non-DNA exonerations. If you unravel all that, and it's difficult to unravel all that, you sometimes see why someone might confess to a crime that they didn't commit and even plead guilty to it if they didn't commit it. Bill's case of Christopher Ochoa involved exactly that. Christopher confessed to a rape murder and later pled guilty to it, and still later was found pretty conclusively not to have committed the offense. And finally, and most difficultly, are recantations. These cases are the most difficult cases, undeniably so. Because they leave the most doubt at the end of the day. You've got a witness, often a child witness, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, testifying about a sexual assault that occurred a year previously. There may have been a delay in outcry. The chances are overwhelming. There's very little significant corroborating physical evidence. A physical examination is just as likely to yield nothing as anything. If it leads something, it's been so long that it's hard to know what the something means. And then 10 years later, when the 6-year-old is 16 or 18 or whenever, you get it, well, it didn't really happen. Mama told me to do it. Or it wasn't stepdad, it was uncle, or something like that. And those are cases that, if I had any hair, would turn it gray. Because you don't know. You just don't know. What you have to do is to evaluate the credibility of the original testimony in light of the new evidence and compare it to the credibility of the recantation testimony and make a judgment. And it's a difficult judgment. And the Court of Criminal Appeals, I know, in 2 cases has been faced with these kinds of recantation cases, and I'm sure they know better than I how difficult a judgment it is. One cannot simply say, we're not going to consider recantation cases, because we know that some of them are genuine. On the other hand, one has to approach recantation cases, in my opinion, with a healthy skepticism, although not with a total cynicism by any means. They're very difficult cases. We had a case in our clinic within the past couple of months, where a lawyer sent us, and not an affidavit, it was a signed statement by a person who's now 20 years of age, who said that he had accused his dad of a sexual assault that occurred 7 years earlier when he was 13. And it didn't occur. And it was because his mama wanted him to say that for reasons of her own. So now we've got this recantation statement, and the question is, what do we do with it? Well, we sent 2 students out, and they interviewed the guy, and it turned out that his grandmother, the mother of the inmate, and his older half-sister, fathered by his father, but different mother, were kind of hovering around the guy the whole time. And they didn't want our students to interview him in private. They would kind of, they were out on a